Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 10-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Also, tell me what the sound is like today. I'm trying to get it better. With that said, let's go ahead and get into the slate here. So we do have a weather concern in the Arizona-San Diego game, so do keep that in mind when building, and make sure to check that later today. Let's get into our pitchers, though, and we're going to start with Framer Valdez for Houston. He's only had 2 games in the past 8, but his earned runs are up and his Ks are down. However, he is pretty pricey. He is capable of a 17 fantasy point game versus Seattle, which he's actually faced already this season and scored 17 fantasy points with a couple of strikeouts, decent strikeout game in that one. So he is capable here. He's just been somewhat inconsistent recently. Senga for the Mets is also in play. He's also pitched decently well recently, though he's only had a few bad games over the past 10. His average is lower than I'd like for the price, but he's an okay option that should get over 17 fantasy points at least today. And so I think he's a good option on the slate, but not a great one. Then we're going to get to Urias for the Dodgers. Now he's gotten a great matchup here. He has 20 fantasy point upside with the win. He also has some really bad games recently, but keeping that in note, today looks like a game where he can extend his 3-game win streak as he's pitched pretty well recently and he has some nice upside in this plus matchup here. Then we're going to look at Zach Eflin for the Tampa Bay Rays. Now he's facing the Angels, and he does have to deal with Ohtani being in the lineup, but he's got good upside in this matchup and has more 20 fantasy point games over the last 10 than most of the other options who are more expensive. I think he's a very good option on the slate, even if Ohtani was able to get to him. And then we'll look at Sonny Gray for Minnesota. He started the season really good, and he's been rough throughout, but the last 3 games has been over 25 fantasy point each. He's also got his K rate going up in that stretch, and so if he can continue that stretch here, he's got a great matchup to have a really good opportunity and have a big game. And then finally, we'll look at Bibby for Cleveland. Now he's facing Detroit, which gives him some nice upside. A few bats for the Tigers have hit pretty well recently, but he's also been good overall the last 10. With 4 wins in the past 5, all leading over 20 fantasy point games, he does draw really good metrics here and has a great matchup, so I think he's a good option. Maybe into our catchers here. We're going to start with Will Smith. Excuse me. For the Dodgers, he does draw some good metrics for a home run today, though he has been a little bit inconsistent recently. He does draw good upside, and he has managed to get some multi-hit games, though he's just not scoring a ton of fantasy points right now. But if he can get a home run, he'll definitely pay off, but he is high risk, high reward. Then we'll look at Yasmani Grandal for Chicago White Sox. Now, he hasn't been very good recently, but he is facing the Colorado Rockies in Colorado. That gives him some upside here. He's also had a couple, he's also had some decent fantasy point games for his price over the last 10 games, so I do think he's viable here, but he is high risk, high reward, as he hasn't been great lately. And then we'll look at Yanir Diaz for Houston. Excuse me. He's had 3 home runs over the last 10 games. He's hitting the ball pretty well right now. He also has some nice home run upside. He's a good option if you want to avoid the Chicago White Sox Colorado game, and he's right in the same price range, and he's hit the ball pretty well with home run upside in this particular situation. Ohtani is also in play at first base for the Angels. He can play in the outfield as well, but he is hitting the ball pretty good lately with a 324 average over the last 10. He was in a little bit of a slump, but it looks like he's back out of it as he hit a grand slam yesterday. He's had 2 games in a row with home runs. Um, so I think he has some really good upside here. Obviously, if he hits a home run to pay off, but he is the best player in baseball right now, so it's hard to ignore him. Then we'll look at Andrew Vaughn for the White Sox. Now, he's a good value play at his price. He's also hit the ball pretty well recently, above his season average. He has some nice multi-hit potential, though if he can hit a home run in this game, that would definitely help him pay off more. But he is a little bit risky as he's not a huge home run hitter. Matt Olson also in play for Atlanta. Now he's also hit a ton of home runs this season. He's at 43 home runs now. He's had 4 over the last 10. He's hitting a ridiculous 324 average. He draws a great matchup here against San Francisco as well, and he has some nice upside for this matchup. Wade Jr. also in play for San Francisco. He is facing Atlanta. Now he's been in a slump, but he is capable of some good games. He hasn't had a hit in a few games, but I do think he's in position to have a good breakout game against weak pitcher today from Atlanta, so I think he's a great option on the slate. Then we'll look at Mookie Betts, who is a core play for me. He does draw a good extreme high price, but he's hitting 420 over the last 10, and even without the home runs, he's scoring a lot of fantasy points. I do like his upside as well. He also has home run potential in this one, so I think he's a great play if you could afford him. Jose Altuve also in play for Houston. Now he's also very expensive. He's also hit the ball very well. He's also got some stolen base and home run potential, and I do like his upside here. He's been a little bit less consistent than Betts has, but I do think he's a good play on the slate, especially being a little bit cheaper than Betts. And then Polanco also in play. He's been somewhat inconsistent throughout the year, but he's hitting the ball pretty well right now. He's also had 2 home runs in the last 10. He even managed a couple stolen bases, but I don't necessarily expect that. He does have good fantasy point production lately, so I think he's a viable option here. And Minnesota's kind of a sneaky stack, especially with them being a little bit cheaper. Also, Julian from Minnesota can play at this position. He's hit the ball very well recently. He does have some home run upside. It's not his only thing to do though. Is he does manage to score fantasy points in some different ways. So I do like his upside, but he is high risk, high reward today. Then we'll look at Ahmad Rosario for the Dodgers. He's also in play, though he has been somewhat inconsistent since joining the Dodgers, but that's kind of how he is. He does draw good metrics for this game, and he doesn't need a home run to pay off, but he has hit a couple recently, which has been somewhat of a surprise considering the season. However, he does have nice upside in this matchup. Then we'll look at third base here, and we'll look at Ryan McMahon, McMahon here. So for Colorado, he does draw really good metrics here. He's better at home than on the road usually, though he has been a little bit of a slump recently. He does draw a nice upside. He's had 2 straight home run games, and I look for that to continue here. If at this price, he does need that to pay off. Moncada for the White Sox is in play. If you go with the White Sox stack, he's definitely somebody to consider, though he doesn't have a lot of home run upside. He's got a lot of good, just base hitting potential here in this particular game, though he has been somewhat inconsistent recently and throughout the season. So, but he does draw good metrics for this particular matchup. Jose Ramirez also in play for Cleveland. He does draw some good upside here, though he's been very inconsistent recently. He's kind of here because his stolen base potential is so high, as he's hit the ball decent but not great throughout the season. Polanco can also play here at third base, and then Isaac Paredes for Tampa Bay is in play for second or third base. He has not hit the ball very well recently, but he's nice and cheap and has some good metrics. He's had 2 straight 10 fantasy point games or better, so I do like his upside as a result of the situation that he's in. Moving to shortstops, we're going to look at uh, Tover for the Colorado Rockies. He does draw some good metrics here. He's hit the ball extremely well recently, and he's really good at home. He's also got nice home run potential, so I like his upside in this one. He's a guy I really want to roster. Very close to being a core play today. Ahmad Rosario can also play here at shortstop. Elvis Andrews did hit a home run yesterday. If He's also hit really well over the last 10 games with 366 average. Uh, as long as he's getting multi-hit games, which he's had 3 in the last 4, he's somebody to consider, and he's nice and cheap, and that gives him a lot of upside. And then Carlos Correa for Minnesota is also in play. He does draw some good metrics here. He's been somewhat inconsistent throughout the year, but he has hit the ball very well recently with 3 home runs over the last 10 games, and strike him as well while the iron is hot. So both Elvis Andrus and Correa, somewhat surprising that they're hitting the ball as well as they are right now. Moving outfielders, we're going to look at Luis Robert Jr. for the White Sox. He does draw good metrics for this game. He's hit the ball very well this season. I think he's a very good option on the slate. He has nice home run potential, and he's one of the few guys on the White Sox that has actual good potential all the time, but even better in Colorado. Acuna is obviously in play. I mean, when is he not, to be honest? He has home run and stolen base potential. Though he hasn't quite hit as well the last few games, he still manages some big games, so he is in play. He's just a little bit more risky. Otani can also play here in the outfield as well. Randy A for Tampa Bay also in play today, a little bit cheaper than the guys above him, and he is also got that stolen base potential and home run potential. Though he hasn't hit them quite as well or consistently, he has hit the ball pretty good recently, so he does draw some nice metrics. Nolan Jones for Colorado also in play. If you go with the Colorado stack, he's definitely somebody I would consider, as he does hit the ball really well at home. He's had 6 home runs in 30 games at home this season, so I like his upside, and he does draw good metrics here. He's a little bit cheaper as well. Ruiz for Oakland is kind of a sneaky play today with his stolen base potential. Not a home run threat, but he does have good metrics for a home run for couple of stolen bases, and if he can get on base, he can up those fantasy points really quickly. Though his price is not super ideal. Then we'll look at Benintendi for Chicago White Sox. If you do stack the White Sox, he's somebody to consider, though he has been really inconsistent recently with only a 167 average. He's also not a huge home run threat, but he has had a couple of games where he's had some good fantasy points the last few, so I think he does draw some utility here. Trace Thompson for Chicago White Sox is in play. Um, he's hit for 174 over the last 10 games. He hasn't been very good, but he does draw some good metrics for this game. He's this high risk, high reward. He's a Hail Mary play on this particular slate. Max Kepler is a guy that I'm very close to having as a core play for Minnesota, as he's hit the ball pretty well recently with some home runs. He does draw nice home run metrics, but he is a little boomer bust sometimes. But he's had some hits in the last few games that have given me some upside in this particular situation. Jock Peterson also has a nice advantage here for San Francisco. Now, he has not hit the ball very well throughout the season, but he does draw home run metrics here, and he does draw some nice upside as a result, and he's nice and cheap today. Then we'll look at Profar for Colorado. He's been somewhat inconsistent throughout the season. He's been in a little bit of a slump lately, but he does draw good metrics for this game, and he's had hits in 3 straight games that give him some utility, though he's a little bit overpriced. Then we'll look at Hanley Ramirez for Tampa Bay. Now he's in an interesting spot because he's hitting the ball very well recently without the home runs. I like his upside. He has good fantasy point production even without the home runs, but sometimes he does lay eggs, so do keep that in mind. But he's nice and cheap and gives you a lot of upside to maneuver to other players. If Wallner plays today, which I don't know if he will or not, he would be in play, but he has been inconsistent recently. But he does draw good metrics for this matchup, so he's a considerable option if he does draw the start. And then last but not least, Toscar Hernandez is a value play that's a high risk, high reward Hail Mary. He's boomer bust, even though he's hit the ball a little bit better recently with a 333 average. Most of the time, he doesn't score enough fantasy points unless he hits a home run. So you do want him to hit a home run, but I do think he's optional. He has an option today. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.